Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the True Life Podcast. We're here on Wednesday. That must mean it's High Octane Speculation with George and George, aka Mr. Wizard. Benjamin George, how you doing, my friend? How are things?
I'm doing pretty well. How about yourself?
I am living the dream. Thank you very much. Whoa, we got some stuff going on here. Yeah, I'm doing well. Things are heating up a little bit. It seems to me that we are in the midst of you know what? I am not sure my are we live right now, Ben? I
It
have to make
says
my
life.
camera.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's keep that in there. It seems to me that we are at a crossroads right now. We have a sitting, or not a sitting president, but a president who's just been potentially arrested and arraigned. What do you know on this?
Well, I don't know. Part of it seems like it's a nothing burger.
Right.
I mean, the guy, he showed up, he went into court, said not guilty, walked out of court. Wasn't like he was ever in handcuffs. Wasn't like there's mugshot floating around. Wasn't, he didn't go to jail. If I was charged with 34 felonies, I'm pretty sure it wouldn't go the same way for me. What about what about you?
Yeah, I agree. I've been coming on and talking to people about it being a giant distraction, and I think it's
Mhm.
multifaceted. Number one, I think that you know, I think it was John Dewey who said government is the shadow cast upon people by business, and Trump is a lightning rod for likes, for shares. So on one hand, the media loves it. On another hand, one half of the Democratic Party, the on one half of the political parties, the Democrats, they want to smear this guy. Number three, the guy's totally guilty. But I think it is one of the old magician tricks, like look over here, not over here. I think that what we see in the world right now with all these train derailments, this sort of soft domestic terrorism that could be happening is, and we don't want people paying attention to that, whether it's a warehouse fire, whether it's a train derailment, or whether it's a bank failure. There's so much going on that they don't, and I say they, I mean multinational corporations, special economic zones, family offices, the people that tend to have or pull the real strings of power, they would prefer that you see this illusion instead of the real thing. Am I on base there, or what do you think?
Well, I think that's a lot of it. I think there are it's multifaceted, right? I think you do have this whole political game, which kind of has to be played out,
Mm.
and so why not use that as a very convenient cover to, just like everything else. Whenever the headlines are dominated by a single story, you have to wonder what else is happening in the world.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think that I think it's not just. Oh, excuse me, my microphone is a little off here. Man, come on, George, get with it. Uh, okay, that sounds better.
Oh, it
Yeah,
does sound better. Oh yeah.
yeah, I was all tinny there for a minute. I get all crazy. So it seems to me that what's happening around the world is what's happening here. There's all these riots going on, and I propose that what we're seeing, what you and I have talked about quite a bit, is this uh, destruction or the implosion of the financial system. We have the banks going. There was just another uh, the owner of the Cash App was murdered in
Mhm.
San Francisco. And when you pair that together with the multi crypto billionaires who have been murdered or died suddenly in the last year or so, and you look at people like SVB and all these, the crypto millionaire that is on trial right now, and how much money is being funneled through those places. I think that is
Mhm.
part of the distraction they're keeping you away from, is this implosion of the financial system.
Well, yeah, I think you had Jamie Dimon of J.P. Morgan came out, or what, 2 days ago, and said that the banking crisis is far from over. It's just begun, essentially. And
Right.
it's kind of funny. We have this massive implosion of banks, and if you remember the last time it happened in 2008, it was a prolonged, protracted event that was touching every single aspect of society and couldn't get away from headlines. And yet, this thing seemed to wrap up in a week.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. It's remember how I think it was Paulson went to Congress with like a sheet of paper and is like, I need a blank check. And the whole country erupted. Like, what are you talking about? You're not getting a blank check. So then he came back a week later with like a 3-page paper and got his blank check. And I don't know if the focus was on finance, if they could get anything done, because that's the one thing that would unite everybody on the bottom is that, hey, look, we're done with this. You keep making promises, you keep failing, you sit up here and talk about being a libertarian until your company fails, and then you run to the government for a handout.
Oh yeah. I mean, just to the tune of $2 trillion, right? I mean, $2 trillion is, a wild amount of money. And the devaluement that the US dollar is going to incur because of that is, I mean, especially when you start to factor in all these other things that's happening around the world. You have BRICS and all of this other stuff, the depegging of the petrodollar. I mean, we're potentially looking at a massive devaluation of the US dollar.
Yeah. And, you peel back that onion a little bit. People are always wondering, how are we going to pay the debt off? We're going to pay the debt off. Well, we're just going to devalue the dollar. It's an age-old trick, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep. I mean, it's been done before, so why not do it again?
Yeah, that's, we talk about it all the time. History doesn't repeat, but it rhymes. And, you're coming off the gold standard was a devalue. The British pound before Bretton Woods, the British pound, I think, was the gold standard. And then you just see all these currencies being devalued. And, whether it was the Romans that, added pewter or added some other metal to their silver to make it look as if it was heavier. It's the same old song and dance.
Yeah, I mean, it's been going on for at least a couple thousand years. And it seems to directly correlate with the rise and fall of nations or empires.
Yeah. And, when we talk about money, the idea of money, the changing idea that it is, and we talk a lot about what happens in other countries happens here. I would like to put a little focus on what's happening in the Middle East. We've recently seen China come out and broker a deal between Saudi Arabia and Iran. And it could be that China is responsible for stopping the war in Yemen. Like what kind of a megaphone or what kind of a message does that send to the rest of the world? Like, look at these guys, the peacekeepers.
Well, I mean, again, this is one of those things that's been repeated throughout history, right? You have these apparent, peace treaties and deals and all this stuff, and there is a little bit of progress that moves forward from that. And then all of a sudden it regresses back to, age-old conflicts between these people. At the end of the day, because of the indoctrination, and this goes for the worldwide, and just whatever you want to hyper focus on. So we're looking at the Middle East. Because of the indoctrination of those, the different types of Islam there, and you have a massively polarizing populace where people truly hate other people just because of the indoctrination that they receive. You don't get to wash that away with a couple signatures on a piece of paper. And we've learned that throughout history over and over and over again.
Yeah, it's a great point. It's so sinister, but also fascinating to me to think how great of a motivator hate can be. And maybe that's why people harness it. It's this, especially when you look at the Middle East and you look at the conflict between the Israel and the surrounding states. It seemed for quite some time that you were seeing with the Abraham Accords, you're seeing Israel and Saudi Arabia and Israel and Qatar, and this sort of bridge being built. But now it seems with the chaos that's happening, whether it's the financial implosion, whether it's this Thucydides trap, or whether it's oil, whatever it is, maybe it's just the state of the world that we're in or a cycle. But it seems to me you're seeing a reformed Muslim community start to rally around some of the old ideas about how they felt about Israel. It seems like that relationship is breaking down. Simultaneously, Israel seems to be breaking down inside.
Right. I think, Israel in the relationship with all the Arabic countries around them, it is regressing. It was moving forward for a while, and now, and I think partly due to Israel's internal implosion and their continued, expansion in Gaza and all of that stuff with the Palestinians, you can only put your foot on the gas for so long before you run out of fuel. And I think some of these ideas, some of these situations have just ran themselves out of fuel, and now the only option is to get out of the car and go back to where you came from.
Yeah, yeah, it's an interesting analogy in an area that's so rich in oil that they're running out of fuel.
Well, I like to be contradictory every
Yeah.
now and again.
Yeah, I was speaking to my audience the other day or so about pipelines and
Hmm.
supply chains and the way in which, supply chains seem to be whoever rules the supply chain tends to rule the area. And the example I gave is here in the West, we heard a lot of rhetoric when it came down between Russia and Ukraine or Russia and Europe that Russia was going to just shut off the pipeline and starve some of the European nations. And the analogy I gave is like if you think of the pipeline, like the blood flowing through the system, and there's little capillaries that come off. If you shut off the spigot, the blood stops, that organ dies. But
Hmm.
I think it's a good way to look at the way the world is working. It's not, in a way, it is nation states and oligarchs, but it is this battle for supply chains, because really whoever supplies the lifeblood to the system, be it oil, be it natural gas, be it money, whoever controls the choke points or the spigots are the people that kind of control the world. And we see these conglomerates in all countries. They're half
Hmm.
Saudi Arabia, a public-private partnership between another country and the state of California, a public-private partnership between Hawaii and Israel. And it kind of circumvents the whole state apparatus. And so it's this changing of the guard and supply chains that are really beginning to show us who's in control and who could be in control. What's your take on the idea of supply chains as a managing director?
Well, you control the resources, you control the world.
Mm,
I mean, that's kind of, if you look at nation states as something that gathers resources, right,
right.
and controls and distributes resources, if you look at them in that field of view, that's kind of always been the case. The expansion of Rome was, acquiring all of these resources from foreign lands and bringing them to Rome and building up Rome. And eventually that expansion got so large that all of these, there was enough resources in another place where they said, we don't need the main Rome. We're going to break off and be our own Rome. And it kind of kicks off this cyclical event of the changing of the guard, as you said, and the evolution of nation states into what comes next. Whether that be through the autocracy to the dictator to the democracy to back to through to the oligarchs and onward and onward and onward. We've seen these cycles kind of repeat themselves, so to speak, pretty well, much as long as we've been recording history on this planet.
So if I take that tack, then do you see a pattern, or have you read about a pattern, or notice any pattern where natural resources are more important than human resources? This is the first question. And I guess the second question is, and you could take them any what you want. Are we living in a world where natural resources are more important than human resources?
Well, I think that changes. I think it's an equation that, if you don't have the people, then the people become the most important resource. But as we've ballooned in population in the world to over 8 billion people, now the more important resource for in a lot of different angles of looking at this is definitely the natural resources. How do you continue this technological escapade that we're on? Less and less we need the human labor of the past, and more we need access to the resources that in the refinement and all of that stuff that we've come to. That's basically since the Industrial Revolution kicked off this technological epoch.
Yeah, I've found myself thinking about these questions for the last few days, and it's kind of been a real thorn in my side, because I see the attention and the value that's given to human resources, and it does seem to be, depending on where you live, in decline. I mean, if you look at the children laboring to get cobalt out of mines. It's, if you look at the, Egypt having the slave markets back, and if you look at even Jerome Powell and the bankers desperately trying to drive down wages, like, what sort of a system is this where the people who are in power are just blatantly saying, we don't want you on the bottom to make any money? Don't you guys get it? Like, maybe that's not their goal, but it sure seems like that.
Well, I mean, in that light, I could definitely see that. And in another light, I see it as, if these populations at the bottom get too big and start to accumulate too many of the resources, they look upwards and say, well, why do we need you guys? And so it's almost a defense mechanism from the powers that be to kind of, to move in this direction. Otherwise, they lose their seat of power. Because, you can only abuse and take advantage of people for so long before, you start to get groups that start talking and banding together and accumulating their own set of resources, figuring out how to do things more efficiently, more sustainably, how to get the job done better. And all of a sudden, these pillars of society that we have begin to shake and crumble.
They become pillars of salt.
They revert back to the old.
Yeah, it's such an interesting time to be alive and see all these changes happening. And, if I could send out a note to people out there, I'm hopeful that people will stop consuming and start creating, because I think that we, and when I say we, I mean you and me, everybody listening to this, and it doesn't matter what color, what gender, what socio-demographic you're in, but I think we're coming upon a time where you can, if you're willing to take a chance and if you're willing to stand up and willing to believe in yourself, that the opportunities coming are getting greater and greater. You had mentioned that the people at the seats of power are using finance as sort of a way to bludgeon the people on the bottom, and there's cracks happening. Well, I think these cracks represent opportunities. And I think You're seeing almost a meritocracy showing back up, like, hey, if you're good at something, you don't need to have a piece of paper from one of these diploma mills, because they're not really teaching anything anyway in some ways. A lot of great institutions out there, but there are a lot of places where you go to get a piece of paper so that you can move up in a corporate world. What do you think?
Right. Now, I think it is ripe with opportunity, not just because of that, but also just because of technology.
Yeah.
I mean, look at the tools that we have access to. Look at the types of, you can get solar panels, wind generators, you can get all the raw materials you need to experiment and create all sorts of different, ventures in sustainability. People are creating vertical gardens inside of shipping containers, right? I mean, there's so much opportunity for the common person. Even I would argue more so than ever, simply because of our access to tools and technology that are, because of consumerism, dirt cheap at this point in time, relatively speaking.
Yeah, maybe this is an angle that's happening too. And as you were talking, I began thinking about this. There's this incredible discrepancy. There's this incredible discrepancy. There's this incredible thing going on where the government tells us that there is, no jobs out there, but you drive by and there's jobs wanted, people wanted. There's, 15, where my wife works, there's no less than 8 jobs unfilled all the time. And as soon as they fill one, 2 more people quit. And a lot of the people on Wall Street and government are saying, like, well, where are all the people at? Even though they're fudging numbers and trying to make it look like the unemployment rate is a certain number. And I think what's happening is exactly what you said. There's all these ways for people to go out and create things and build a life for themselves without participating in the slave labor market. And whether it's a vertical garden, whether it's doing podcasting, or whether it's doing mentoring. And there's all these new payment systems, crypto, one of them. Like, hey, I'm just going to go out and drive a cab and I'll have these guys pay me in B&B and bada bing, bada boom. And maybe that, and with consumerism, you're seeing the deflation of product. You're seeing the price of everything going down. There's no demand for it. There's
They're being cheaper and cheaper made. And so when I think about it like that, that makes me understand why the Fed, the banks, and all these people are so nervous.
Sure. And, and it's interesting because it's kind of had a very, uh, a win for the people effect, I would say, because, that's kind of what kicked off this banking crisis.
Mm-hmm.
The people attributed it to COVID and things like that, but it was bad investment practices by these big multinational banks. And because they had bad investment practices and because of exactly what you just mentioned, all these people now finding different opportunities in a way to basically unplug from the system, now you had an increase in inflation. As that inflation increased, all of these bad investments from these people now took their toll essentially and are bankrupting, billions and billions of dollars worth of investment. And so it's kind of almost a win for the people.
Yeah, I would agree. I'm hopeful that in the future, people at the top, and let me just throw this scenario at you, and you can tell me whether it's possible, impossible, or there's potential for it. And so it seems to me that if we continue to go down the path where whether it's populism or whether it's creative people finding ways to work outside the normal system, the people on the top begin to get nervous. Finance begins to dry up. The level of crime becomes so obvious that they can't be swept under the rug anymore, which that kind of seems to be happening as well, whether it's financial crime or political crime. Might that evoke a panic where the people in positions of authority just try and shut down the internet, or they try to shut down everything, pretty much taking their ball and going home?
Oh,
Is that
I
possible?
mean, I think it's possible. We were talking about the Restrict Act last week. That's pretty much that, right? They decided that, we need to shore this thing up, otherwise we're going to be shit out of luck here pretty quick. And yeah, and so is it possible? For sure. Will it happen? That's a really hard prediction to make. If you all of a sudden shut down the internet, everybody's connected on the internet these days. That's how everybody interacts with their family, with their friends. And that might, if all things, actually lead to a real revolt. Because now, it's one thing to slowly just kind of chip away at these liberties and all of these freedoms. But all of a sudden, if you remove my ability to talk to my grandma, because she just happens to live in South Korea, for making an example, well, what does that mean? Now I'm going to be pissed, right? Now I'm going to be angry. Now I'm going to tell how angry I am to all the people I can talk to. So communication is a very fundamental thing to human society, and I think that's one of those things, even more so than maybe money, that if you start messing with, I think that's where you get, a very populist response.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think along those same lines of communication and motivation and money, in my opinion, I think we're seeing a turn towards, I want to say anger, but that's probably not the right word, but maybe I can't think of the right word, but it seems to me that we're seeing the relationship with people in authority change. I think a lot of people are beginning to stand up to the people that think they're in power, or maybe they have a cool job or a cool title or a cool label. And the people are like, you know what? I don't really care about your label. And not only individuals, but I'm thinking particularly people in uniform, like cops and service members. Never before have I seen so many service members looking at the institution they serve and starting to ask very critical questions. And the way the government is treating, blue collar people or people in uniform, I think that they forget that a lot of the people that like the police, they're there to serve in some level, like the merchant class. And
Mhm.
when the bankers, when the government start coming down hard on police officers, they're not in a big rush to help out that merchant class, even though the merchant class isn't the government. But there's just
Yeah.
this all around dismantling of the idea of authority. Have you noticed that? Have you seen authority changing, or is it changing in some ways good, some ways bad? What's your take on that?
I think there's just a severe lack of trust in authority
well
these
put.
days.
Yeah.
For a multitude of reasons, and you touched on a few of them there. You got stuff with like the VA, right? You have these people who give their heart and soul to serving this country, and then all you hear is how they're shit on when they come back. They're thrown away like yesterday's trash, and they can't get the help they need. They can't get the things that will make their life better. They're just used as a pawn in a crappy political game. And yeah, I think, and again, back to the communication aspect of this, once those stories get out there, once people start talking, that's when, people look up and they're like, okay, you're saying a lot of fancy words here, but at the end of the day, where the rubber meets the road, where's the food on my table? Where's my health? Where's my well-being? And people are now not seeing the return on investment, right?
Yeah.
And to like the police officers, that's just such a convoluted thing. You have first of all, you have all of these restrictions, tests for IQ, all this other stuff that they kind of really narrowed down who could possibly be one of those people. And then because of that, the interactions between them and the public have turned south many times over and over. And again, back to the communication. Now those stories are out there. Now that's getting around. And then you have them, like you said, being shit on from above and, removing immunity, defunding police state, across, entire city centers, crazy stuff. And if you're one of those people, you're looking up too, going, why, what are we doing? I don't trust you anymore. So I think there's just a massive amount of distrust across the board.
Yeah, it seems like we have all the components for a really big fire, and they're all just kind of sitting there waiting for a spark. I was listening to there's a girl named Melissa, and she's got a channel called Squirrel Tribe. Everybody should check it out. She's really interesting, and she's fun to watch, and she's really smart. And she had uncovered this idea. She's been speaking quite a bit about what's going on in East Palestine, in that area, the train derailments, the warehouse fires. And yesterday she came across some news that I thought was interesting. And it was that I think last week Biden came out, or the Democratic Party, or the decision makers, whatever you want to call them, they came out and they announced this new plan, $450 million in grants to put up solar panels or renewable energy at old coal mines. And Janet Yellen came out and talked about it, and she said it's such a great deal. You're going to make 10 cents on the dollar just to get it going. It's going to be free money, and you're going to be making this profit on top of it. And there's a few triggers there, and I'm like, oh, okay, wait a minute.
Free money is the biggest red flag in the
world. Right. Free money and money on top of it. And all you got to do is put renewable energy on these old abandoned coal mines, or these old coal fields. And so the girl had brought up this map, and lo and behold, where were some of the most coal mines and coal fields that have been abandoned was right up in East Palestine. Yeah. Palestine, over by Pennsylvania, all these places where there's been all these train derailments. And it doesn't take too much imagination to just go, oh, it looks like a little real estate acquisition there. Go in, you buy it for pennies on the dollar, you get the grants. And she named Mike DeWine, the governor of that area. And she'd spoken about, look, he was the guy that turned away the government. He was the guy that turned away everything. He's the guy that partnered with Norfolk Southern. And you could see on some level the sheer greed, selfishness, papered over with this idea of I'm looking for the greater good. You know what I mean? It's pretty sinister if it's true.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, just the fact that they set aside that sort of money kind of kind of gives a good piece of evidence that it could be true.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, there's always been a battle for where energy comes from, right? I mean, all the way back to the turn of the Industrial Revolution, you got things like Tesla and Edison and all this stuff,
Yeah.
right? DC AC current and kerosene versus gasoline and all of these other things. And I don't think that battle's ever stopped. I just think
Right.
it's taken a back seat to all the other headlines, kind of like how we started our
Mm-hmm.
conversation. And I think that this is just that age-old battle just being fought again and again and again. And I think it's the people who invested big in it. Those are the people who were gun-ho on this side. The people who invest big on this side, they're gun-ho on this side. And they use these thin veneers of doing good for the planet, or saving the wilderness, or all these other things that to cover up their just massive inherent greed.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was having some similar thoughts in that, are we witnessing, the same way we have this false choice of red versus blue or black versus, we have all these false choices ahead of us. And on some level, it seems that, we have fossil fuels versus renewable energy, even though some of those people are playing both sides of the fence. Are some entrenched people on both sides, but what is the future going to run on? Is it going to continue to run on oil? Is that why OPEC Plus cut the amount of oil that's coming out to raise up prices? Are they circling their wagons and saying, look, we're running on this? And you have this new industry that's like, well, we've got all the subsidies, we're going to run on this. I'm sure that plays a part, but to what extent do you think what we're seeing is a rivalry between old and new powers and energy and what's going to run the future?
Well, I think, I've seen some statistics on it, and, the amount of renewable energy that's actually utilized in the world is something, very small, like between 7 and 13% was the estimate. And everything else is ran on petroleum. And including all of the factories that go to make all of those renewable resources, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So it's almost another false choice. It's like,
Right.
Oh, look, we're doing good over here, but again, there's kids mining cobalt in the Congo. We have slave labor being rampant throughout all of these places where we're just completely strip mining the environment. And yet somebody wants to talk about climate change after they get off of a private jet. It's more of the look at this hand while this hand's over here. It's the same game being played. What the future actually looks like, that's an interesting question. I mean, I don't think we're going to see renewables take over petroleum anytime soon. Now, I could imagine if we continue on these nuclear fusion breakthroughs, if fusion actually, gets to the point where it's a true over unity for the entirety of the system, all of this entire conversation changes.
That would be awesome. I would imagine that, there's a lot of people that don't want that.
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, especially if you're an oil baron or you're heavily invested in the solar panel market, there's a lot of people who would be against that. And I think, there's also been, in terms of, suicides and people disappearing and things like that, another sector that has always experienced that is people who come out with new innovations on energy. There's been plenty of people who've said they've claimed they've had a breakthrough on generating hydrogen, a hydrogen ran car or something like that, and they disappear. It could be the brown gas that makes the car go boom and they just vanished, but there's definitely incentives in this game, and to be naive of those incentives is to not be able to see the forest through the trees.
That's interesting that you brought up incentives, because I think that everything we're talking about can be brought back to the idea of incentives. And if we're looking at the future and wanting to build a better future, I think that the incentives have to change. And in a weird way, this chaos that we're going through, this implosion of the financial system, these ideas are, I think in some ways, are changing. Like when I think about money, I can talk to my daughter about what do you want to be when you grow up? Or what do you want to do? And she's like, well, I don't want to work for money. And it's interesting to start to hear some of this next generation talk about what it is they want to work for. And there's a lot of ideals they want to work for. And in some ways, it seems to me, with demographics the way they are, and so many baby boomers coming to the end of the mortality experience, like I think that those ideas are kind of changing and they're malleable. And maybe that's why there's not so many people in the workforce. And that's why it's so difficult to hire people. And that's why it's so difficult to train people to do jobs that, are not something that people want to do. It's like this idea of how we operate, how we live, and what we value is changing. And when those three things change, money has to change with it. And so when I say money, I mean incentives. What's your take on that?
Well, we haven't talked about it for a little while, but we talked a lot about it back in the day. Is there's going to be a rise of parallel economies, and we're in the midst of that. We're watching it happen, and I think now we've already seen. So we've started to see the parallel economies start to come up, and I think we're going to see parallel societies, parallel communities, people who break off and try their own thing because they have just enough resources to give it a shot. And just like digitization enabled the ability for crypto to be a real life thing that created this whole parallel economy that's kind of taken over a good chunk of the financial world, so too do we have in society all of these factors that are in play, the dirt cheap acquisition of products and resources and goods and technology and all of these things. Now we have tools that enabled the ability for people to go off and try new experiments. So I think we're going to see just the continued evolution of that, and then ultimately the breaking up of nation states. I think that's where it goes.
Yeah. And I want to give people a real world example of some of these parallel economies happening in real time. As a podcaster, you are competing with everyone, millions of people all the time. And the model of advertising has always been that advertisers would, partner with someone like CNN or Fox, or, everybody's seen the commercial, like brought to you by Pfizer. And here's an example of a company wanting to get the word out about their product. They give the people money, and then they talk about their product, or they have a spot where they do that. In today's world, you're looking at individuals like myself or Ben, where a company will come, they'll just send you an email and say, look, we have looked through your content. We like it. Here's our product. We're going to give you an affiliate link. Talk about our product, and any people that come using your link, we're going to give you a percentage of it. And what an incredible business model that is. They don't need to pay people up front. There's no real contracts. It's kind of like a piece deal. Hey, how much what kind of value can you provide for our product? You seem like a good fit. And that model has to be the future. It's easily, you don't need a PR person. You send them an email. The content creator makes an original sort of piece for the product. So they're getting, it's just creativity all around, and it's cutting out the middle, and it's just a better model. And I see that happening not only with podcasting, but I got to think that kind of model, that almost holistic approach where you're reaching out and talking to people instead of having to go knock on the JP Morgan building and sit with a PR person who may refer you to the HR department but wants to talk to your friend first. Like, all that's kind of moving aside, and we're seeing this robust return to shaking hands and creating content and reevaluating things.
Yeah, it's a more efficient ecosystem.
Well put. Thank you. That's a great way to put it.
And, funnily enough, you want to know who really pioneered that ecosystem?
Yeah.
Online gambling.
Oh, it's so true.
And back when I was traveling Central and South America, I did some consulting for this gaming outfit who did online casinos and things like that. And they were ran in Costa Rica by a billionaire out of India. And they built this multi-hundreds of millions of dollar business just through affiliate marketing. just people who had gambling websites out there. People, and then, because of the way search engine optimization works, somebody searches, online blackjack. And they get this page on, hey, play online blackjack here. Click this link to deposit now and get a free $500, match to your deposit. And hundreds of millions of dollars they built that business. And that was back in, right around 2007, I think I was consulting for them. So, and it was a little bit before that too, but it wasn't as streamlined, and it wasn't as efficient. But over the years, they kind of pioneered that thing into existence. And now it's a great way to do business, right? If I have a good product and I can connect with people who have an audience that's associated with my product, why do I want to go through a marketing and advertising agency where, I'm paying a few $1 million for some sketches, instead of just saying, hey, I'll just give you a % of everything that comes through the door.
Yeah. Yeah. You do it. Here's a little bit.
Yeah.
It's such a better model. And it, in some ways, it's the thinning out of, or cutting the fat, it's like you have all these advertising agencies that have hired artists and engineers and thought leaders, or, even people like Caldini, or these Richard Thaler, or these people that advise presidents and people on their image and how to affect the way people think. Like, all those people are being pushed out of the way for Gina the TikTok dancer. Because she's got more views and they can target what they're doing. And it's so funny to me because, like, to think that Gina the TikTok dancer is better than like Richard Thaler or some of these guys that have written tons of books on persuasion, it's just so comical to me.
Well, humans value authenticity.
Yeah, it's true.
And this is kind of a throwback to authenticity. The TikTok dancer she's authentic. She's doing her thing, right? And that appeals to people more than some, manicured little presentation and with this clothes and this color tie and standing in this lighting and all of that stuff, because eventually it gets to be just not authentic.
Yeah, it's beautiful. Please.
Oh no, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to add on, when you said authenticity, it made me think about the world of advertising, the world of cartoons. I remember being a little kid and watching cartoons, and they would only come on Saturday or Sunday mornings, and there was only a couple of them. And while I enjoyed them, there was like Hanna-Barbera, that was like one company that made them, and maybe one other one. And it just Warner Brothers. And then, same thing when you get into movies. And, in some ways, the foundation I'm building is that when there's not a whole lot of competition, the things you think are good are probably fair, because you don't have anything to compare them to. There's no competition. And, in a weird way, the internet has democratized the world of finance, democratized the world of creators. And it's, in some ways, in doing so, it has thrown conventionality to the wind. I was talking to Dr. David Sullivan about education, and we, on a similar note, is this idea that we've standardized education has made it less, less exceptional. Yeah, exactly. And then the same with creators, the same with advertising, the same with business, the same with products. Like, we've standardized all these models because we thought we had it figured out. But what we've really done is just cut everybody off at the knees and say, no more creativity.
No more innovation.
No more innovation.
Right. And I think, as these parallel economies continue to evolve, that's when we're going to see this explosion of new products. I mean, we've started to already kind of see it, because, like, for instance, there's a couple products that made like tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars just because they attached to Joe Rogan when he was up and coming. Right. And so we're seeing completely different channels open up for not just creators, but also people who are trying to move a product that they've made, which then inspires more information, because of my cost to acquisition for a customer is just, hey, George, would you mind you want to partner up and you do this, as opposed to going through the millions of dollars of advertising agencies, guess what? I'm going to win eventually a little bit of market share.
Yeah. Yeah. How can you not?
Yeah.
Save yourself a lot of headaches in the way, and taxes and backroom deals and jealousy and emotional problems. And yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's, there's a quote that says, being really early looks a lot like being really wrong.
Oh yeah.
Right. I'm sure we've both been, I know I have, like, this isn't working. And then you just wait. I've made so many mistakes where I was early and then I got out and then I was right. And I'm like, oh man, this wasn't.
That's the worst feeling too.
It really is, man.
Yeah, you're like, oh man, I thought I really nailed this one, and then fast forward a couple of years, and you're like, I did nail it. I was just really early.
Yeah, exactly. And I see that in the space now. One of the things, to the listening audience, is if you're doing something passionate that you love right now, that's bringing value to a handful of people, or it's something that you would rather do instead of get up and going to work, is to continue to nurture it. Because if you feel that way about something, you're probably onto something. It's probably something that you would be great at. It's probably something that is going to be an opportunity for you in the future. And so my advice is just to stay with it and become the best you can at it, while simultaneously doing that other thing if you have to. But yeah, I think that we're on the cusp of everyone. Like I said, if they have the courage to follow their heart and believe in themselves, and they have the opportunity to, then they should be pushing forward with the things they love to do. I think that the innovation is coming. And even though it's scary, even though it looks as if the world is falling down around you, it just means that it's springtime. It's April. It's time for new growth.
Well, and I'll tell you what, I think the younger generation really gets that.
Yeah.
They intrinsically, they kind of understand that. They've watched all of this crap growing up. They've watched all of, I'm sure the conversations back when, we were younger about, America and the American dream and all of these things were much, much, much different than they are today, even in individual households, right? And there's much more realistic perspective to the reality of the American dream actually existing anymore. And I think, they grew up in an environment where they saw, because that's all kids do, is they sit there and watch, right? And they saw, just like your daughter said, I don't want to work for money, because she saw what money did to the people around her, people that she loved, her family, what sort of constraints it put on her life. And I think the younger generation just they get that. And I think that scares the hell out of the boomers.
Yeah. Yeah. You had mentioned in a previous podcast that you have been fortunate enough to sit in on some of the up and coming Fortune 500s, or even some of these big boys, and they're frantically trying to find ways to change their model about how to create a better workspace. I recently heard today, have you ever heard about this thing, Wisdom 2.0? It's got like Gabriel Mate and a bunch of professionals, and it's this sort of what's that big tech thing they have down in Texas where they bring together the
South
tech
by Southwest.
Okay, so it's like a South by Southwest with a wellness bent to it, and they're bringing like, some people that are advocates for psychedelics, and they're trying to redefine the workplace and make it a place where people actually want to go. And I just caught wind of it, and I was looking at some of the speakers on there. It looks kind of interesting. But the reason I bring it up is because it reminds me of what you said, some of these meetings you went to. It reminds me of what you said about some of the younger kids getting it. And it reminds me what you said about some of the older generation, who some of them have nothing but, resentment for a younger generation that doesn't want to go through the turmoil that they went through. And that seems to me like a little bit of resentment. Like, I had to go and work this horrible job. You should have to too.
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, there's always been jokes, I had to walk uphill both ways in the snow to school type idea. Yeah. And I think this is just that kind of, that joke played out on a much larger, deeper scale at some levels too.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, it gets back to what we're saying. There is a better way. Guess what? You can't walk uphill both ways. There's a better way to do it. You know, maybe you're walking too far, or you know, maybe you could catch the bus or take a skateboard or drive your car. Like there's a better way to do it. And you know, I've been speaking to a lot of people too. A lot of people I've had on my podcast are recent people who have stepped down from an incredibly lucrative position at top tier firms. And they're talking about burnout. They're talking about,
Mhm,
hey, this company's values don't align with mine and I can't do it anymore, you know,
mhm,
or the way in which this company is trying to squeeze production from these people is unethical and I'm not going to be a part of it anymore. So
mhm.
it's happening everywhere, and I think there's a quickening to it.
Oh, sure. And I think, everything's just fuel on the fire for that at
Right,
this point.
right.
Um, yeah, you know, when you have 15 corporate board meetings about trying to figure out how we're going to change the entire practice of our business to, entice young people, you pretty much already lost that game. That's the reality of that situation. How much time was just wasted talking about something that you clearly have no idea about, right? Uh,
Yeah.
and because if you did, you would understand that it's not changing your internal business model to attract these people or trying to make a more hospitable workplace or something like that. You would realize that the fundamentals of what people want from life, the value that they derive from their actions in this world, is shifted.
Yeah, that's really well said. And I think it speaks volumes of the narrow and short-sighted, albeit precious view of corporate America. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I you read like these earnings calls or you read articles about like, well, let's just change the CEO and we'll keep the same board of directors and that'll fix everything. You know, we had to
Mm-hmm.
fire this CEO because he didn't have some good ideas. Do you have any good ideas? Yeah, let's make all the people on the bottom work harder. You know, like, okay, no, no, no. Do you have any good ideas?
Yep. Well,
And,
speaking of interesting ideas, I wouldn't call it a good idea.
yeah.
So I don't know if you saw this, but it was a few days ago. CERN has found out that they've redefined time in a day to like 24 hours, 56 minutes, and 40 seconds or something like that. And the way they did this is they basically, so the way our atomic clocks work, like you have a cesium atom, and that cesium atom emits a beta ray, like, at a very consistent frequency.
Okay.
And then so they created the antimatter of a cesium atom. And it turns out that the antimatter's decay is actually pretty much lower than the normal atom. And so they took the average of those two and they said, this is how we should measure time. And some of the quotes from some of the CERN engineers just cracked me up like, oh yeah, everybody's always wanted an extra hour in the day. This is how we get to a 4-day work week because now we can get 40 hours in 4 days and still have, the weekend and like all these other things. I was like, wow, man, talk about an idea.
Yeah. Man, I'll have to read more about that. It's just redefining time. Like, yeah, this is 40 hours. Perfect.
Exactly. Yeah, that works, man. Uh,
You know, I had an that's fascinating. I like the idea of thinking about time, and I had this idea recently where if we want to know how we're changing the idea of time, I wonder if we could look at how time is measured in video games. Like, you know, can you go and see how a day in Final Fantasy is X amount of time, a day in Roblox is X amount of time? You start averaging all these days for the digital world.
mhm.
What would that say about the world we live in? Would that tell us, you know, how we're
Hmm.
spending our lives? You know, I don't have it fully fleshed out yet, but I think there's something to be said about studying the way in which we simulate time in video games versus the way we spend time in real life. There's got to be
It's, a,
something in there.
it's an interesting idea. I think,
Yeah.
from a programmer perspective, a lot of those things end up arbitrary.
Mm,
I'm building my world, and all I'm doing is, I have it set so it goes from night to day, and then I just put in an integer, You know, it's going to be 2 hours, or it's going to be 4 hours, or 6 hours. So it's a lot of arbitrary decisions by people, but you know, there's no such thing as a truly arbitrary decision. You know, those are products of that person's environment, of what they think the game is going to, you know, how it's going to perform, all of those factors. So yeah, I think that would be an interesting thing to look at and just see, kind of plot it out on a graph and see where, you know, if there's any sort of correlation that falls together.
Yeah, some sort of patterns that develop, like, oh, you know, it turns out that programmers have this interesting concept of what is, you know, sustainable, or what time should be. You know, there's this weird thing about them.
And programmers are the last people you want to ask about that. Trust me, cans of Red Bull and 3 a.m. have been very plentiful in my past.
You know what? Like, what's wrong? Like, we're redefining pronouns. Why not redefine time? It's man-made anyway, right? Like, I mean, if you really want to get an accurate measurement of time, you'd look at the stars.
Well, I mean, even then, you know, you're just going to have discrepancies, right? Like, just like this CERN that came up with this new discrepancy of time, you know, between matter and antimatter particles and their decay rates. Like, you know, time is definitely a construct, which I hate that kind of cheesy saying, because people mean it in a lot of really stupid ways, I think, oftenly. But, you know, it really is. It's just a human constructed element, that was structure that we've placed upon the world, and then we've built everything around it. You know, it kind of just reminded me of, remember Y2K?
Yeah, I do. Yeah. Oh no.
That was all yeah, that was all because of time, right? That was all because some programmers took a shortcut in banking software, and instead of using 4 digits for the year, they only used 2. So then all of a sudden everything was going to go back to 0. So yeah, it just reminded me of that. That was funny.
Well, yeah, not only in the digital world, but I think when we switched from the Gregorian and the Julian calendar, you know, all of a sudden, you know, I'm born in October. When I think of October, I think of an octagon. I think of 8 sides. Why is October the 10th month? December sounds like 10 to me. Why is that the 12th month? You know, it's like, it's littered in all of our measurements. And like, if some aliens came down, they'd be like, dude, what
you guys are
what
confused.
are you guys doing? What is this? No wonder nothing's working. You're built on a foundation of sand over here.
So we decided to decode your language, and you crazy monkeys have no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. If it's a living language, you know, why not? Like, why not? And here's another thing to think about. If you do have parallel economies, if you do have the breakdown of nation states and this sort of, on some level, return to community. I'm not saying they're communes, maybe some of them are, but why not reimagine, you know, if you're going to reimagine the work week, you're going to reimagine the time you spend. If you're going to reimagine what's important, you're reimagining how you spend your time. So in some ways, you're redefining, by redefining what's important, you're redefining time, I think. And I think it's, you know, I haven't read that article, but I think it's a great exercise. Like, that's something we should be teaching in schools. We should be teaching kids to imagine time. Like, why not think about it? I think so many of the theories that we have had in the past are odd or off, or in some ways, I think we're headed towards our own Copernicus moment.
Well, you know, as we get more data about the world around us, as we explore further, you know, we should evolve our concepts of not just, you know, not just time or society or community, but, you know, everything that we're doing, because, hey, we figured out that it doesn't have to be that way. So what can we change about it? You know, like in the time vein of conversation, you know, from a evolutionary biology perspective, you know, humans are kind of diurnal creatures. Like, it's actually, you know, we want to nap in the middle of the day when the sun is at its zenith, because we used to not have all these shelters with fancy air conditioning, and, you know, at that point in the day, you don't get as much work out of the effort you put in. So, you know, imagine if we took a biological perspective and related it to time, right? Like, you know, mandatory nap time again.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm all for it, man. You know, and it's not that far-fetched. I mean, if you look at Italy, they have like a siesta, or in some South America, people take a siesta. Like, I'll get to that later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you know, by and large, they function just as well as anybody else.
Yeah,
Um, you know, I think the argument against it's always productivity,
sure.
productivity, productivity. But yet, look at the tools that we've created to change productivity. I mean, I
Yeah.
got Google Bard, and that thing can kick out a lot of stuff that would take me hours and hours and hours to write. Instead, it only takes me 10 minutes to edit.
Yeah, so you're the only person I know that has been experimenting with that particular form of it. What do you think?
I mean, it's a handy tool if you put in the thought on how you want to use it and you know like what you're trying to accomplish. For me, I've been using it to kind of pre-write programs for me.
Mm.
So instead of me having to conceptualize the entire thing and think about the logic and then you know kind of go through those motions in my head and also on the screen, I just you know give me a simple program for you know transferring this file format to this file format, and it pops up you know a simple program for it. Is it something I'm going to you know implement at a production level? No, but it just saved me 2.5, 3 hours of
Mm.
formulating that myself. um, I one thing I wanted to do is I was going to start doing some blog posts and calm conversations with AI
Yeah.
and give it a prompt to start from, and then take that prompt and expand upon it. And all of a sudden, you can end up, you know, with 1,000, 1,500, 2,000 words, and it takes you 25, 30 minutes. I mean, from a productivity level and an efficiency level, I think if it's utilized as a tool and not a crutch, I think there's great potential there. But you know, like everything else, how many people pick up an encyclopedia today versus go to Google and type in something? You know, I think the ability for it to be used by a crutch is so accessible that it ends up, you know, if it becomes the standard, you know, we're back to the same conversation about being cut off at the knees. Things stagnate, creativity dissipates,
Mm.
innovation goes away. Because now instead of, you know, like the simple program is one thing, but if I asked it to write a complex program, all of the innovation, all of the logic that I would have to think through to go ahead and create that was done for me. I didn't have to do the work. I didn't have to piece it together. And who knows, I might have pieced together something a bit more elegant than what was generated. But because what was generated only took 30 seconds versus the hours and hours and hours that I would have to put in for that super complex task, you know, the efficiency factor there all of a sudden, you know, becomes the crutch, right? So a fascinating tool, but definitely some very large pitfalls potentially.
Yeah, it is. It's fascinating to me. I'm excited to see it, mature. And I've been reading. I know that Bill Gates and Elon Musk came out with this article that said we should put a pause on this AI stuff.
Hmm.
And then there's another group of people that want to accelerate it. And you know, I find myself leaning towards the acceleration camp. Like, let's see what it can do. I don't see it becoming Skynet and sending drones over to bomb a rival package company if I own a package company. I don't see that happening, but I do see, like you said, I do see the people using it almost having, on some level, an unfair advantage with productivity, but they are limited in their creativity because it takes a creative prompt into thoroughly getting a usable answer. And so I
Hmm.
think that it kind of comes with its own checks and balances in a weird sort of way. And, you know, it,
Maybe.
yeah, I'm hopeful, I think, anyway. And I, can you give me two stories? One story would be the reason to pause the AI, and a second story would be to accelerate AI. I would love to hear your two different stories there.
Well, in the story of pausing, I think ultimately it comes down to we just don't understand the implications. And
Okay.
I think those implications are so multifaceted that we don't even understand the potential implications of what this could
Mm.
mean. I mean, if you think about it from you can think about it from an educational perspective, from a productivity, from an economic perspective. What happens if all of a sudden we can cut out 90% of the middleman?
Mm.
Excuse me. Where do they go? What do they do? How do they? How does that impact society at regional scales? How does it impact society at national, at worldwide scales? So, without thoroughly understanding those implications, we could put ourselves in a societal kind of collapse, dystopian moment, inadvertently. And so, I think that's kind of probably the main crux that I see for stopping it, for pausing it, for keeping it going. Along the same lines, we don't understand the implications. What's to say? We've always had this idea of utopian society. From an average person, look at your daughter. She doesn't want to work for money. How does that become a reality in the world? Well, it becomes a reality in the world if you accelerate these things and you offload 90% of the workload to robotics and computers. Now, that was supposed to be the promise of computers, but these AI systems and robotics that are out now, there's not too much they can't do that a human can do better. And then, so what does that do for society? It frees people to go off and pursue their passions, pursue their dreams. And instead of having to check into that 9 to 5 along the way, to fund all of this stuff, now they have a foundation that they can just build from, a foundation of opportunity and a foundation to fall back upon in the case of failure.
Yeah. Yeah. Those are two great points. And I guess I'll pull it back for a minute. It's so strange to me that Bill Gates and Elon Musk, I think you could argue, two of the biggest pioneers in building the future, have come to a point where they want to stop building the future. It's a weird turning point. Maybe that's their age. Maybe this is a signal that their ability to innovate is about to be eclipsed.
Well, I think both of those cases, they get a lot of limelight, but they didn't really invent fuck all at the end of the day. But that being said, I think there is, there's an inherent fear in change, right?
Yeah.
This changes the way that they've operated in the world fundamentally.
Yeah. Maybe they're speaking on behalf of everything they're about, everybody that's behind them, everybody that they're a mouthpiece for.
Right.
That sounds to be probably a little bit more accurate.
Now, the other thing about stopping it, and I haven't heard too many people talk about this, is if you stop it, that doesn't mean everybody's going to stop.
Right.
You're just removing access to it for, the common person and people who can't afford it. The evolution of these things is going to continue in earnest, in private, simply because of how effective it is. So now you're creating a different socioeconomic class almost.
Yeah.
Even faster,
Yeah, in a weird way, it's similar to the internet. That's like saying, well, and you know what? If you think about it, there's a lot of really wealthy people that are pissed off about the internet. Like it just forced competition and it changed everything. And everyone had these, you can almost take it back to supply chains. People had all these supply chains. Here comes the internet. Here comes the internet, just disruption. The same thing with AI, disruption. And if you read any of these old Robert Barron's books, they'll tell you competition is the enemy. And now it kind of makes sense when you're talking about Gates or Musk. They're like, no. We can't have any more disruption. We're at the top. Everybody that pays me at the top, you don't want to disrupt this. So what they're really saying is we don't want to be disrupted. We don't want this to go forward because we are in danger.
Right. And I think, there are the Skynet argument, right? Like, it's probably not going to go off and figure out how to run these robotic factories and create drones and bomb somebody.
Right.
But it very well could too.
Sure.
I mean, if you fully automated a factory and you fully automated the supply chain into it, there is no checks and balances on what sort of things were getting delivered to the factory. You could essentially create anything out of factory. Now, I don't think so. Then this gets into the thing of, artificial general intelligence. So these large language models are pretty much are still a far cry from artificial general intelligence. They're just correlating and weighting different data sets in to provide a response. They're not really fundamentally creating something. It's not innovating, it's not creative, it doesn't have an identity of self.
Right.
So there, so that argument, is there's still a big chasm between what we have in these large language models versus in actual artificial general intelligence.
Yeah, it's a good point, and it's amazing to me how interconnected it is too. Because when I think about disruption, when I think about the internet, and when I think about AI, I think about it just driving prices into the ground. Like it's deflationary. It makes everything cheaper. And how can we have all this inflation when everything's becoming deflationary? I don't understand that.
Well, when people add massive amounts of zeros to the ends of debt, that's how.
Right. Yeah.
One example that comes to mind, just because they tore down the building, was Sears. Remember Sears?
Yeah, of
Sears had the
course.
catalog
I
every
remember
year.
circling stuff in there. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean it was the internet before the internet.
Yeah.
And the internet shows up, and now, like I said, they demolished the Sears in town here, and it's being replaced by apartment buildings. They're pretty much. I think they're probably going to disappear here relatively soon. They weren't able to make that transition to the internet when they had every single tool available to them and every single opportunity, all the money to do so. But because of that fear of change, now they're almost, you ask a Gen Z person who Sears is, and they probably wouldn't even know.
Yeah, no idea. Yeah, and that's all in our time. I think it's a lesson that, you put it really nice, in that to fear change is okay, but to not move forward with change is a problem. Everybody is a little afraid of change. There's nothing wrong with being scared of change, but the truth is it's good for you. It's good for everybody, I guess. On some level, it's necessary.
Well, it's natural.
It is natural. Yeah.
Everything changes. I mean, as we're cruising around the galactic plane here, we are entering space that no human has ever been in before. That's fundamental change. Every single aspect of nature's change. It changes. So, I mean, it is fundamental to the universe that we inhabit. And so to try to run counter to that, every time that we put ourselves in the path of the freight train of nature, we tend to regret it.
Yeah, that's I'm gonna have to clip that. That's beautiful. Well, Ben, I love talking to you, my friend.
Likewise, brother.
It's fun, it's interesting, and it helps me think more clear about some of the ideas that I have been mowing over in my head. But before you get out of here, before I let you go, where can people find you? What do you got coming up, and what are you excited about?
BenjaminCGeorge.com. It'll be back up in a couple of days. I'm switching over servers. You can find me there. I'm excited to do some more podcasting. Some things on the Terra Libre project are moving forward, so that's exciting. Again, sitting on a whole bunch of content, just waiting to hit the publish button, but we'll see when that happens. But always excited to have these chats, George. They're always, it's good to think about things from as many perspectives as you can. And,
Agreed.
When you have these live conversations and very good queries from the host, it allows you to really explore those perspectives. And I value our time together.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it any better. It's fun, and it's something that the audience has been sending me some notes saying they enjoy it. So thanks to everybody out there who's been participating. And that's all we got for today. We will be back soon in a few days, I'm sure. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for spending time with us today. Check out the links in the show notes, and we'll talk to you soon. Aloha.